So imagine that you have the opportunity to be able to fulfill a lifelong dream, a dream of a lifetime, a dream that so many people have had, but you have a chance to be one of the unique few that have the opportunity to actually be able to do it. And so on the day of your draft, you actually pick third in the NFL draft. A team like sees you, picks you third, and you're on their team, which is pretty exciting. And so, I mean, the opportunities, the possibilities are endless. However, when you start your career, it's a rough going. And so, as you're with your first team that drafted you, by the time you're done with them, you've been responsible for 68 turnovers, but you've only thrown 61 touchdowns. And so now you're placed with this new team, and the reality is this new team is just as bad as the old team that you were on as well. And so some of the traits that were there actually follow you to this new team. But for some reason, during the next season, Coach Kyle Shanahan of the 49ers sees something in you, and so they sign you to be a part of their team, and they begin to just invest in you as a backup quarterback. And then what happens is at the end of that year, you actually end up being signed with the Minnesota Vikings, and you're hired as like a stopgap guy, like the guy that they wanted to be their starter got hurt, and so they bring you in. And as a result of your work with this team, you lead them to a 14-win season, which is pretty phenomenal. Like your career is starting to turn around. And then, of course, because you were a stopgap guy, you're in free agency, and then you're picked up by the Seattle Seahawks. So many of you already know where this is going. You know who I'm talking about. But you're picked up by the Seattle Seahawks, and there is still that fear, when you were with the Minnesota Vikings, you had Jefferson. I mean, you had some really great receivers and that kind of thing. And so, when you have that when you go to Seattle, and the great thing is you actually join that team and lead them to a 14-win season as well, and then you get to the playoffs, and of course, last week you win the Super Bowl, and so of course you guys know who I'm talking about. Sam Darnold, that's right. I'm talking about Sam Darnold. No, the Rams, you'd wish that I was talking about the Rams. But yeah, I'm talking about Sam Darnold. And the great thing about his story is here's a guy that goes from bust to champion, which is, his story is pretty amazing in that way. But I think as I began to look at, the story of his career, I began to realize, he's a metaphor for us as well. Because many of us have been busts, in our lives. We've made some bad choices and bad decisions. Now here's the reality. For him, his bad decisions really just resulted in the loss of a game or several games. Our bad decisions have far more reaching implications, right? Our bad decisions could risk the loss of our family. Our bad decisions could risk the loss of our career. Our bad decisions could risk the loss of friendship and connections. We can go through the list. The ramifications of our turnovers in life are far greater than just losing a game. And so as we look at his life again, I think it really does serve as a really incredible metaphor as well. And so I found this article that I wanted to read a quote from you. And I would love to tell you the name of the article, but it has some locker room language in it. so I can't tell you the name of the article in church. But here is what it says in the article, and you can read this right on the screen as well. It says, Sam Darnold is lauded for his ability to withstand intense criticism and failure, eventually transforming his career through hard work and a never say die attitude. And I love that, a never say die attitude. And so again, what I love about this is the fact that here is Sam Darnold, and he's had this horrible career, but yet this coach sees something in him and still brings him along to be on his team. And the result of that is it turns his career around, really. And so I think what's important to look at is this is, again, a great metaphor for us because of the fact that we've made some terrible choices. We've been in some terrible situations. Yet, Jesus Christ sees something in us because he sees the created image of God that exists within us. And so, therefore, there is the desire to redeem our lives, turn our lives around, heal our lives, and renew our lives. And so what he does is he comes along and he invites us to be a part of a winning team. An example of this you can see is in Matthew chapter 9, verse 9, it says, as Jesus was walking along, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at his tax collector's booth. Follow me and be my disciple, Jesus said to him. So Matthew got up and followed him. You know what Jesus is saying? Is look, it's time to join a new team. I'm inviting you to be on my team. Now realize the situation that Matthew is in, because Matthew was a tax collector, and again, we've talked about tax collectors in the past, but basically, if you're unfamiliar with them, tax collectors basically just made their money taking advantage of the people that were in their community, the people that were fellow people in their society. They take advantage of them. And really, there was nothing that the people could do because the tax collectors worked for the Roman government, and so basically, they can collect taxes and charge whatever they want to. And so really, here's this guy, he's sitting at the tax collector's booth, and I'm sure that he's had other people come by and curse at him, call him names, judge him, maybe spit at him, because they were hated. Tax collectors were hated. And all of a sudden, here comes Jesus walking up and says, hey, how would you like to join my team? And the beautiful thing about this is not like Matthew was walking along, and not tax collecting at this point. It's not like Matthew was, maybe pondering his life as he was walking through. No, Jesus sees him in this moment when he's at his worst, doing his worst, and Jesus says, I invite you to be a part of my team. And that's exactly what he does for us too. I invite you, at your worst, to be a part of my team. Now, here's the thing that's really interesting. When the Seattle Seahawks signed Sam Darnold, they signed him to a 3-year, $105 million contract. That's the sacrifice they made. And it included a $32 million signing bonus, and $55 million of his salary was guaranteed. I would love just to be a kicker in the NFL. Right? Just so, hey, can I wipe off the bench? I'll towel some things off. I mean, just look at what he's getting for his career. And the idea behind this is they were willing to pay a lot to bring this guy on this team who could possibly lose. And I think it's important for us to realize this too. Like, Jesus paid a lot. He took a risk. Like, he went to the cross on our behalf. And again, the implications of what Jesus sacrificed is far greater than $105 million. He gave his life for us to be able to come to know him and embrace him and live for him. That's what it is that he offers to us. That's the sacrifice that he made. Now, I want to tell you that there is a difference, though, between the Seattle Seahawks and Jesus. There's a significant difference. Because if Sam Darnold had been signed to this $105 billion contract, $87 million of which he basically got or is going to get, then still, if he would have came and if he would have started and his career tanked, he would have done horribly, then eventually what would happen is he'd be benched and then possibly even off the team. And so the beauty of the sacrifice that Jesus made for us is that although we may still struggle, although we may still wrestle, although we may do bench-worthy things in our lives, although we may do things that deserve us being cut from the team, again, he will never do so. That we are in this, and he is with us for all of eternity. That's the significant difference. But like Sam Darnold, there is a question that we are going to have to ask. But I love what it says here in Romans chapter 5, verses 10 through 11. It says, for since our friendship with God was restored by the death of his son as our sacrifice, while we were still enemies, so while we were at our worst, we wanted nothing to do with Jesus. While we were still enemies, we will certainly be saved through the life of his son. So now we can rejoice in our wonderful new relationship with God because our Lord Jesus Christ has made us friends with God. I am a friend of God, right? He has made us friends with God. It's amazing when you look at it from that perspective. But I think it's the same thing. Now that we know that, so it's important for us to understand this. Moving forward, if we make a decision to follow Jesus, then as we're living for him, we're not living to earn grace, we're living from grace. We're not living to be good, we're living from good. So that work has already been done. But there's still a decision that we do have to make. And it's the same one that Sam Darnold had to make as well. And that decision, that question is right up on the screen. And that's simply this: will we go all in? Will we go all in? Will I fully dive in and give myself to him, to love and to honor and to serve him? So like I said, we've been walking through the life of Elisha, and I hope you've enjoyed this series, because in this series, we've called it New Power for a New Season. And we've been talking about that there are some decisions that we have to make, because the goal of this series is to lay a foundation so that when we reach this point in 2027, that we will not be the same way that we are now in 2026. So over the course of this series, we've been looking at what are some of those decisions that we need to make. And today, that decision that we need to make is, will I fully go all in? Will I fully give myself to him and allow him to continue to work and move in me? And so now for this series, here's what we're doing, is we're starting to land the plane. And so the example that we're going to look at today is actually recorded as the last work that Elisha does when he's still alive. This is the last work. This is the last thing that he does before he passes away. And so it's a really powerful moment, and I really do pray that it will speak to us as well. So it says this in 2 Kings chapter 13, verse 14. When Elisha was in his last illness, King Jehoash of Israel visited him and wept over him. My father, I see the chariots and charioteers of Israel, he cried. So it's interesting because there is an interesting dynamic that exists between King Jehoash and Elisha. And I want to explore that in a moment, because King Jehoash had a blind spot in his life. And I think this blind spot really hindered him from being able to step into like the full king that he could have been in the name and honor of God. And so I want to explore, like, what is that blind spot? So it says in 2 Kings chapter 13, verses 10 and 11, it says, Jehoash, son of Jehoahaz, began to rule over Israel in the 37th year of King Joash's. There's a lot of, a lot of that. Reign in Judah. He reigned in Samaria 16 years. He did what was evil in the Lord's sight. He refused to turn from the sins that Jeroboam, son of Nebat, had led Israel to commit. So let me give you a little background of what's going on here. So several kings before Jehoash is a guy named Jeroboam. Now, Jeroboam is the king of Israel because if you look at Israel's history, there's one point where Israel splits, and it becomes Israel and Judah. And so 10 tribes of Israel are with the north, and the 2 tribes go with Judah to the south. So there's a separation that's there. And so Jeroboam is the king of Israel when that split happens. And so here's what begins to happen is, although there's a split, as far as Judah is concerned, Jerusalem is in Judah. That's where the temple is. And so people would leave Israel to go down to Judah so they can go to Jerusalem to be able to worship God. And so King Jeroboam sees this, and so he has this fear now. What if the people begin to migrate south to worship God, and I begin to lose my population to Jerusalem? So he made a decision. And so the decision that he made is really interesting, because he could have had a temple built in Israel and say, hey, here's a place where you can worship God. He could have had that. But of course, he didn't stop there. So what he did was he created two golden calves, and he put them in different spots in Israel. And then he said to the nation of Israel, here is your God. This is the one that has rescued you from Egypt. Worship him. And then what he did was he appointed priests to lead the people of Israel to worship these 2 gods. And so this is what passes down to the next king, to the next king, to the next king, till we get to Jehoash. And so as a result, he keeps this aspect going. So he has this blind spot that is in his life. And remember what we've been talking about in this series, what we've been looking at, or for the last week or 2, we've been talking about the nation of Aram. And we've been talking about how, especially last week, we talked about how Aram and Israel were at war. So this war is still continuing on. And now what happens is Elisha has been integral in this war. Remember that Elisha would go to the king then, and he would say to the king, hey, don't go to this place because Aram's going to be there. Like, he was an advisor for that king, and now Jehoash becomes king after that guy. And so he's looking at, here's this guy that's my advisor that can help me be able to win this war, and he gonna die. So he's freaking out like, I am losing my advisor. So that's part of the reason, like, he comes to him like, my father. It was like, my advisor, like, I'm about to lose you. What's going to happen with this war? What's going to happen with me? Over the last couple of weeks, I've talked about that there are two types of people that we really need in our lives. One is we talked about truth tellers. Remember we talked about them? We said we need truth tellers in our lives. It's going to challenge us to really work on our lives and deal with some of the issues in our lives. And then last week, we talked about the fact that we need advisors, people who are able to see the pathway that we're on and maybe give us insight into what we can do in order to be able to be successful or see changes in those ways. And so what happens is, I think when it comes to the relationship between Jehoash and Elisha, he wanted an advisor, not a truth teller. Because I guarantee you, Elisha was saying, like, bro, you need to stop this. Bro, you need to stop this. Bro, you need to stop this. Finally, it's like, bruh. like, you need to stop this kind of thing. But he didn't want a truth teller. He wanted an advisor. And that's the question that we have to ask ourselves as well. When it comes to our life, do I want advisors or just advisors, or do I want a truth teller in my life as well? Because I think sometimes what we have a tendency to do is we like advisors because advisors are committed to our success. But we don't necessarily like truth tellers because they are committed to our character. And that's uncomfortable. So an advisor may say, hey, here's how you can manage your money. And we're like, yes. But the truth teller may say, well, here's a habit that you need to break. And we'd be like, no. The advisor may say, here are some steps for you to be able to be successful. And we're like, yes. And the truth teller will say, hey, here's what you need to do in order to change your character. And we're like, nope. So the thing that we have to decide is, do I want just advisors in my life? Do I just want yes people in our life? And think about that. Is that part of the problem that we see in our society today? Like, as long as you're my advisor, talking about my success and things that I like, we're like, yes, I want you on my team. Let's go. But then as soon as you become a truth teller, now it's like you're judging me, you don't like me, you don't accept me, you don't love me, and we begin to reject the truth tellers that are in our lives. So we have to make sure that we don't have blind spots because we have resisted the truth tellers that we could have. And as we continue to go on, I really do hope that this will continue to speak to us. But here's what I want to encourage, as you can see right on the screen as well. Seek out truth tellers as much, if not more, than seeking out advisors. Because here's the thing. You can ruin some really great advice with bad character. So we really need truth tellers in our lives as well. It goes on and says in 2 Kings chapter 13, verses 15 through 17. It says, Elisha told him, get a bow and some arrows. And the king did as he was told. Elisha told him, put your hand on the bow. And Elisha laid his hands on the king's hands, which is really significant. I'm going to talk about that in a moment as well. It's a really powerful moment. Then he commanded, open the eastern window. And he opened it. Then he said, shoot. So he shot an arrow. And Elisha proclaimed, this is the Lord's arrow, an arrow of victory over Aram, for you will completely conquer the Arameans at Aphek. So what we see here is Elisha kind of acting more in a role of not just advisor, but one of telling prophecy. He's saying, now that you've done this, we're declaring victory. Like, you are going to win this victory that is coming, which is really powerful. But there are several things that we can take from this passage that I think will help us to be able to, will help us to be able to grow and to develop and change in our lives as well. Because you notice, do you guys remember what window did he tell Elisha to open? Which window? the window facing east. Now let me tell you why. The reason why he told him to open the window that's facing east because Aram was to the east. So he's taking an arrow and he's firing the arrow. Wait, that's not east. So he's taking an arrow and he's firing that's east, right? That is east. Okay. So he's taking the arrow and he's flying the arrow towards the enemy. Towards the enemy. So in other words, he is facing his enemy as he lets go of the bow. And this is the thing that I want to encourage us, because I think if we're going to go all in with God, then here's what it's going to require. It's going to require us to face our enemy. And sometimes the face of the enemy, when I look in the mirror, is me. Like, I'm going to have to face my attitude. I'm going to have to face my mindset. I'm going to have to face my sins. I'm going to have to face my temptation. I'm going to have to face my struggles. And I think that sometimes is the greatest challenge, because I think there is a difference between facing your enemy and being aware of your enemy. Would you agree? And I think many of us, over the course of the series, I've talked about that all of us, we have that one thing that is our struggle, that one thing that is our wrestle. And we need to figure out what that one thing is, because everybody has it. There's no judgment there. We all have that one thing. We need to figure out what that one thing is, because it really does hinder us. But now what we have to decide is, will I now face that one thing? Because here's what many of us will do. Instead of firing the arrow to the east to face the enemy, what we do is we say, I know there's an enemy, but I'm going to fire my arrow south. Or I'm going to fire my arrow west. Or I'm going to fire my arrow north. So the idea is we are aware, like, I know the enemy's here, but I'm going to go in this direction and never face my enemy. And then we wonder, why don't I grow? Why don't I change? Why don't I develop? And so I think what God is calling us to do is God is saying, it's time for you to now face your enemy. It's time for you to now face your enemy. To fire you. But here's the part that I love about the arrow. Whose arrow that Elisha said was? It's the Lord's arrow. It is the Lord's arrow that you are firing. So it's important for you to also realize, like, as you loose the arrow, realize it's not your arrow. It's not the arrow of your strength. It's not the arrow of your ability. It's the arrow of God being released towards what it is that you're facing. Now, are there going to be some decisions that we need to make? Absolutely. Are there some steps we're going to take? Absolutely. But again, it's important for us to realize God is the one that's fought the battle. And here's what's beautiful about this is the victory is declared before the battle's even fought. And so, we've focused on this throughout this year, and I'll probably say it throughout the rest of my career. But it's important for us to realize the moment that I said yes to Jesus, the battle was won. The battle for my character, the battle for my life, the battle for my growth, the battle for my development, the battle for my healing, the battle for my mindset, the battle for my mouth, right? The battle was won. It was won. But there was still the act of the bow. And so there's a part of us that what we need to do as a result of this is say, God, you're fighting the battle, you're doing the work, and now I am just submitting to the work that you're doing in me. And the beautiful thing about this is there will be times where you will do great, and there are times when you'll do not so great. But there's something really powerful in this moment as well that I really want you to understand too, is not only do we have to face our enemy, not only do we have to loose the arrow of the Lord, but here's what I love as well. It says that Jehoash goes up and he picks up the bow. And then what Elisha does is Elisha takes his hands and he lays his hands on Jehoash's hands. Now, I want you to understand how powerful this moment is. Because it wasn't like he laid his hands on Jehoash's hands once he got his act together. It wasn't like, okay, you have stopped worshiping those other gods, so now I'm going to lay my hands on your hands. Like, this really is important for us to realize that this moment is also a declaration of God's incredible grace. That although you may fail as far as your personal struggles, I am laying my hands on your hands. Because Elisha's hands also represented the Lord's hands. And so I am placing my hands on your hands. And I am still anointing your life. I am still with you. Even in the midst of your blind spot. Even in the midst of your struggle. Even in the midst of your wrestle. I am with you. And my prayer is what that should do for us is this should bring us to an awareness of how great and merciful our God is. And I know that we've heard the stories of God's going to get you. I know we've heard those stories. And I know that we've been in some of those churches. And I know that sometimes we don't always think about the others. Now, are there consequences to our choices? Yes. Is there fallout to those choices? Yes. Are we going to have to deal with those choices? Yes. But it's important for us to also realize that there's still the ultimate victory. And the ultimate victory has already been won. So we pursue him. And although we flounder and fault and fail, we still pursue him. And we continue to grow in him. So even in our struggles, even in our foibles, God is with us. So I want to encourage you to begin to think about in your life, though, what are you refusing to face? What is it that you are not challenging head on? What struggles are you still allowing to persist just because you won't face it? And one of the things I want to encourage you to understand is just this reminder. You know, it tells us in Romans that sin is no longer our master. It's not your master. You now have freedom. And in that freedom, you have the ability now to begin to choose because of what it is that Jesus Christ has done. We can now begin to choose because he's empowered us to be able to do so. And so that thing that you're facing, I don't know if you've ever done this, but there was one time where I was at my grandmother's house, and she had this den. It was a really long, den, really, really long. And so in order to get to the den, what you'd have to do is you'd have to walk through, this bedroom, and once you get to the bedroom, and you're walking through the bedroom, you now see, the den of horror, because at night it is dark, and you're like, oh my goodness, and it feels like there's a presence that is there, and then you walk in, and you turn the light on, and you realize, oh, there's nothing there. I think I might have told you a story once as well, as I went into the youth room once, and I walked into the youth room, and I opened the door, and it was like twilight. And as I walked into the youth room and I opened the door, I saw a head on the table in the youth room, a head. I saw that and I was like, nope. And I left. I was like, I'll use the bathroom in another part of the church. So I'm not going in there. And then I go in the next day, during the day, and when I walk in during the day, there was an inflatable turtle that we had that was sitting on top. One of those floating things that had a head of a turtle on it. That's what was there. But and I say that because here's what I want us to understand, is sometimes when we don't face what we need to face because we're afraid. It seems so ominous. And it seems like it's so massive, and it seems like, especially when it feels like it's been our master for so long, we don't face it. But then, Jesus turns on the light. and you realize he's with you. And you realize, oh, you're not so bad. Remember that scene in Rocky when Rocky's fighting, Clubber Lang? And Clubber Lang is starting to like wail on him, and Rocky's like rubbing his head like, you're not so bad, right? Remember that moment? Or is that just me? Go watch Rocky 3, you know what I mean. But I think it's that same way. With Jesus, we begin to realize that that thing that is in front of our face that we need to deal with, it's not so bad. Now, it may take time to overcome it. There are times we may struggle and fall back, and that's a part of the journey. But it's not so bad because the victory's been declared. And we have the opportunity to be able to do just that and experience that in our relationship with him. It goes on and it says in 2 Kings chapter 13, verses 18 and 19. Then he said, now pick up the other arrows. Remember, whose arrows are they? Okay, they're God's arrows. And remember, they were arrows that they flew where? At the enemy, right? So that's how significant these arrows are. So now pick up the other arrows and strike them against the ground. So the king picked them up and struck the ground 3 times. But the man of God was angry with him. You should have struck the ground 5 or 6 times, he exclaimed. Then you would have beaten Aram until it was entirely destroyed. Now you will be victorious only 3 times. So, as we look at this, here's the thing that I really want us to understand as well. Because I talk about facing what we need to face. And what happens to us is if we allow the thing that we need to face to become rooted in us, then what can happen is it can become a dividing force in our lives. And the result of that dividing force is this. Like there's a part of it that says, God, I need to trust you and depend on you and rely on you. But what has happened is that thing has become something that you also trust and that you also rely on. And so part of it is hard to say goodbye to that thing because now I've trusted this thing, especially if whatever it is that you struggled with, you trusted it, and maybe in the past it felt like it brought some sense of relief. I walk in the kitchen and I grab tortilla chips and salsa, and it brings release, right? So, but whatever it might be, whatever your struggle could be, if it's alcohol, pornography, or just whatever it might be, we turn to that thing. Or it could be our jobs. It doesn't necessarily be something negative or evil, but maybe I trust in my money, maybe I trust in my career, maybe I trust in something else. And so what begins to happen then is we become like Jehoash in this moment. So when we can strike the ground and completely overcome, because we don't, and really that's the real issue, is he didn't strike the ground fully because there wasn't a complete trust in God and who he is. And so the result of that could be then is we find ourselves, and there's 2 reasons. It could be trust, or it also could be shame. It could be trusted, or it also could be shame that hinders us from being able to fully trust God. And we strike the ground, but we don't strike it enough. Why? Because at our hearts, we tell ourselves, because of our struggle and because of the thing that we refuse to face, we tell ourselves that we're not worthy. God, I know that you care. God, I know that you love me. God, I know that you've delivered me, but I am not worthy. And so God does something incredible, and here's the reaction that we have to him, the same reaction that we have with, let me ask this question real quick. And these are the 2 things. Do I struggle with trust in God because there is shame in my soul, or my trust level is divided? Do I struggle because there's shame in my soul, or my trust level is divided? In Luke chapter 5, verse 8, it says, when Simon Peter realized what had happened, when Jesus had done this incredible thing, he fell to his knees before Jesus and said what? Oh, Lord, please what? Leave me. I am what? I am such a sinful man. You know what he's saying? I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy. And so what happens is because of our struggles, we turn to Jesus and we say to Jesus, I know that you've given your life for me. And I know that you've declared healing in my life. But Jesus, I look at my mess and I am not worthy. I'm not worthy. It goes on and it says in Matthew chapter 6, verse 24, no one can serve two masters, for you will hate one and love the other, or you will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and be enslaved to money. Now, this is a story when Jesus is talking about money and how we can be enslaved by our money. But I think this also applies not just to money, but it also applies to whatever it is, the thing is that we don't face. Because we say that, God, I trust you, but then also without realizing it, we are trusting it. And because we're trusting it, or because our trust level is divided, there's this tendency to not fully go all in. And so what I want to encourage us to do is to make a commitment like, God, you have declared the victory. I'm going to trust in you, and I'm going to strike the ground as often as I need to strike it. Because I'm going to walk through this with you, and I know that you have declared it. So I am making the commitment that I am going to fully trust in you. Now, I also want to say this, and this is really important too. Some of us in this room, the things that we struggle with, that we wrestle with, when we got into it, it wasn't with evil intent. It wasn't. For some of the things that we wrestle with is how we learn how to survive. You know, I'll never struggle financially the way that my parents struggled. I'm not. So then we pour ourselves into our career, and we pour ourselves in money-making opportunities. Heartbeat's not evil. I don't know how to cope with the magnitude of what it is that I'm wrestling. So I'll drink to help myself cope. Or I'll eat to help myself cope. It wasn't evil intent. It's the way that we learn how to survive. But the problem is, the thing that we've leaned on for our survival is also the very thing that's destroying us. And so what I want to encourage us to begin to do is just to face the reality of what it is. And just begin to say, you know what, Jesus, I am moving forward in my trust in you. And I realize that I've leaned on this thing, and it's not going to deliver to me what it is that it's promised. And so now I'm going to begin to set that aside to trust in you. Here's what I want to encourage you to do. When I went through counseling, this is something that my counselor encouraged me to do, and it has really begun to change my life in a lot of ways as I continue to do it. He said, I want you to begin to identify what are those things in your life that you've held on to. Some of those things that have served you in a lot of ways because it helped you to be able to survive your abuse, it helped you to be able to survive your abandonment. What are those things that you hold on to? And then here's what I want you to do, and I want to encourage you guys to do the same thing as well. He says, I want you to write it a letter. And in that letter, here's what you want to say, is you want to say to it, thank you. Like you want to, because sometimes the reason why it's so hard to say no to some of the stuff that we struggle with is because honestly, it feels like a friend. It feels like someone that's been there, someone that we trusted. When our parents weren't there, it was. When our friends weren't there, it was. So we've learned how to turn to it because it provided something for us. But now the very thing that it has provided for us is also destroying us. And so what we can do is begin to admit that, like, you know what, I turn to you for this reason. And you can begin to write that reason out. And then what you do is in your letter, you write, thank you for what it is that you provided, but now I'm realizing I have outgrown you. And I am also realizing that you are not beneficial to my life. So this is my Dear John letter. This is me saying goodbye to you. Because now I am choosing to trust and rely on Jesus. I'm choosing to move towards him. And for me, as I wrote, and it was for me, there were several letters that I had to write. One for me, I'll tell you, is my ability to disconnect. Because I would move from place to place. When I was from kindergarten all the way till ninth grade, I was in a different school almost every year. So what I learned how to do is I just learned how to disconnect. Because disconnect is, or not connect. Because I knew I'm going to be leaving anyway. So I'm not going to fully give myself here. And so that became a survivor mechanism for me. And in many ways, it served me. But the problem where it became detrimental to me is that mentality for disconnecting also infiltrated my marriage and my relationship with my kids. And I realized that I had to say goodbye to it because it was going to stop me from being able to have what I could have in my relationship with them. And I'll tell you this, it impacted my relationship with God completely. So I decided, I'm going to write this letter to say goodbye to my disconnect. Thank you for the ways that you protected me. You protected my heart in a lot of ways. But you also now hindered me from being able to have the intimate depth and in-depth relationships that I really want. So I'm going to begin to lean on Jesus now and allow him to carry me at those moments when I feel afraid. That's the letter that I had to write. So I want to encourage you to simply think about it, just to kind of walk through that in your own life as well, so that you can begin to hopefully see breakthrough happen for you also. So here's my encouragement. Lean on him. Get rid of the shame, because shame is no longer serving you. It's keeping you disconnected from God and your relationship with him. And Jesus knows. It's not like, he knows. And he loves you and accepts you anyway. He knows, and he puts his hand on your hand anyway. He knows. So let's say goodbye to shame. And let's surrender our trust issues. And let's begin to strike the ground. And strike the ground. And strike the ground. Let's go all in. And I'm going to strike this ground, God, because these are your arrows. And with your arrows, I will have victory. And trusting you. And rely on you. So again, here at Encounter, one of the things that I encourage us to do is to begin to look at those core values that our church is: loving God, loving others, and loving ourselves. Now, typically what I do at this point is I give us 3 commitments that we could make. But I'm going to do something different this week. And depending on how I feel like it does this week, I'm going to begin to do this from this point forward. And so instead of me telling you, here are 3 commitments that you can make, I want to allow you to begin to discover those yourselves. And so instead of giving those commitments, here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you questions. And here's what you can do also is, this is why I want to encourage you, connect with our group me. We're going to show the QR code for that, because what's going to happen today is the group me is going to go out. And with the group me, it will have like a reading plan for this week, but it will also have these questions that are there for you to kind of be reminded of, to be able to go through and be able to ponder and kind of work through as well. And so with Love Up, here's the question I want to encourage us to begin to think about. What am I avoiding that is limiting my trust in God? And what specific step will I take this week to begin facing and healing it? What is it I'm avoiding? And what steps will I take this week to begin facing it, healing it, allowing God to begin to work in me? Love Out. Where have I resisted the truth in my life? And how can I intentionally become more open and responsive to the truth tellers God has placed around me? And then for Love In, if I truly were to go all in with God, what would change in my priorities, habits, and decisions starting now? So like I said, these questions are going to go out today in our group me, so that you can have them to be able to look over and kind of ponder, for yourself and everything as well. So make sure that you have joined that. But my desire is for us to be able to see our life change. So let me go ahead. Father, I thank you. I thank you so much